You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network. This is the Thunderquack Podcast, the official podcast of Thunderquack Podcast Network, where anything can happen. So strap yourselves in and hold on to your butts. It's Thunderquack time!
Hello and welcome to the Thunderquack Podcast Network Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse Spoilercast. I am one of your hosts, Spider Mike.
And I am your other host, Spider Kurtis.
There are so many Spider-Men these days that we figured that we would just get in on it. And
no one will even notice.
No.
We'll just blend right in.
I had a legitimate thought partway through this movie where I was like, what if I am Spider-Man in this universe?
Yeah.
And then
never
you
know.
get to the end of the movie and that's kind of the whole point, right?
Yeah.
Man, let's start with the basics. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, 2018 movie, directed by so many people. Animated film, directed by... Okay, so kind of originally the brainchild of Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
I love those guys.
Yeah, geniuses. They were fired off of Solo, and I would imagine for good reason. They really...
Could you imagine a Solo movie that looked like this?
Yeah.
That would be incredible.
Yeah. I like they have a sensibility, and it's all over this film. And then you've got three directors in here: Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, and Rodney Rothman. Rodney Rothman wrote the screenplay with Phil Lord. And I normally, when you see that many creatives on something, you expect it to be just an awful mess of a film.
Yeah, it's like one was a successor of the other, and
Yeah.
they just had to keep on rotating their people through because they come and go or get fired or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you get a hodgepodge of different styles or things like director visions, and
Yeah.
that's what Frozen felt like to me.
Absolutely. Frozen, Brave especially feels that way, and there's a whole story behind Brave and how that happened.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of Disney Pixar infamy. But in this instance, this is actually an example of several different creatives with different specialties and different sensibilities coming together, and the some being greater than the individual parts.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually really important because Phil Lord and Chris Miller are a couple of white guys. The main character of this film, Miles Morales, voiced by Shameik Moore, is Afro-Latino. So he's black and African-American and Puerto Rican, I think, is his mother's sort of like origin.
Right. Yeah. That's
So I believe it's. I had this on Twitter. I had something open, but I think it might be Rodney Rothman. One of the directors is African American. Maybe it's Peter Ramsey.
It's not Rodney Rothman. It's Peter Ramsey.
It's Peter Ramsey. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important because if you're going to tell a story about an African American, or as this kid is Afro-Latino kid in New York, you want to have accurate representation, and this movie is phenomenal when it comes to that. But it doesn't beat you over the head with any of it. It's just the world that you're living in. And it's so great. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you've got all these different people coming in to contribute to the larger story. And and I think it really lends to that. It helps that. For those who don't understand the term spoilercast, in a second, we're going to go into full spoiler mode. So you've been warned. We are going to spoil the web fluid out of this movie, like every nook and cranny that we want to talk about, we're going to talk about. So you've been warned. Now that we've kind of covered the bases of some of the creatives and stuff behind this, I want to start. Unlike the movie,
well, actually, can we just talk about these three directors first before we go into
sure.
Since we've already been talking about them.
Yeah.
Peter Ramsey, he directed Rise of the Guardians. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah, awesome movie.
It is. It's absolutely great, and so he brings the sensibility of a team dynamic. Because he's already done that, directing a fantastic movie with a team of people, of oddball characters that come together, and he's applying that to this story as well.
Yeah.
So he's a good choice. He's also been a long-time storyboard artist, so that's a really big plus, of course, for any director. Bob Persichetti, he was an animator.
Okay.
He did a lot of in-betweens and worked in the story department for things like Shrek 2 and Shrek the Halls and that kind of stuff, Puss in Boots. And so he's got a lot of great experience that's different from Peter Ramsey's.
The technical, the technical animation side of it. Which is definitely important.
Definitely. And by far the one with the most directorial experience is Rodney Rothman, and he did a lot of live action stuff. He did a lot of writing and producing on things like Year One, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, a bunch of stuff on the late night show. 22 Jump Street, he wrote that movie. So he's got a good sensibility, like a comedy sensibility, and also brings the live action side to it, which I think really helps with this movie as well.
Yeah.
So all three directors come from completely different places, and you can see how they all fit together. I think it's really, really neat. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with a production on this scale, with this many actors, this many moving pieces, the animation being groundbreaking and truly revolutionary in a very stagnant field. Like to be really, really honest, I mean, like there have been some really beautifully animated movies this year, but I mean, like, there's only so far that the advance of the technology can take you before you have to start getting creative with it. The Grinch was fantastic. I loved it. Cara loved it. But it didn't do anything particularly new. It just did stuff better than its predecessors.
We really haven't seen an advancement like this since, I would say, probably Toy Story.
Yeah, this is a huge. I mean, like, I would actually compare this movie more to Tarzan, which is after Toy Story, which uses a really beautiful blend of 2D elements and 3D elements, and
actually, that's a better analogy because it's taking a pre-existing medium and doing something completely new with it, whereas Toy Story is just a completely new medium. Yeah.
So this movie does so much to forward the idea of sort of visual originality in animation, and not animated films have sort of fallen into this stock, and this is Hollywood for you. Like, it's focus tested.
Yes,
it's
especially kids movies.
Yeah, and so all of the especially Sony, I mean, like, they are probably this is the most interesting aspect of it, is that Sony is probably one of the worst when it comes to them just sort of grabbing something and just kind of cranking it out and just going like, okay, here it is. Some of the movies that have come out in the last few years have just been like Like they can be beautiful and they can be really well animated and you get great performances out of the characters, but you're just getting that same sort of 2D, like it really, I almost feel like since Despicable Me, it's like everything just looks like that. Everything just has that same Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Well, I have to disagree with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. That one has such a different style.
You think so? I don't know. I just find it all to have sort of that.
It's rubber nose comedy, like animation,
Sure,
like
sure.
old 1930s Squash and Stretch. It's very, very different than Frozen and Moana and stuff like that, which is more grounded in reality.
Yeah.
That one is a Lord Miller production. That one.
That one is as well. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. Like I just feel like there's been such stagnation the last few years.
Yes, it's all cookie cutter.
Yeah.
It's by the numbers.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason is because they crank them out so fast that you don't get the opportunity to be as as experimental as you want to.
But
they have their schedule; they have to keep them.
Yeah, but Sony was kind of in a funny spot because they had to make this Spider-Man visually distinct enough from the MCU so that it was very clear that this is not part of that, although the great thing about this story is that it is also absolutely part of that, because this Spider-Man
It's the whole
story
point.
is part of every Spider-Man story.
Yeah.
And it really establishes for the mainstream audience. And I think you've used the term game changer for superhero movies quite a bit when talking about this movie. And I think like that is the biggest game changer. I think that the Justice League movie, Batman v Superman and Justice League, tried really hard to get people to understand, like, not necessarily multiverse, but like it was beginning to explain to a general audience the idea of infinite Earths, right? And parallel, etc. with the Batman dream sequence and all of that stuff. Like it was getting really close to it, but it kind of chickened out halfway through. This movie does not. This movie just straight up starts with us in a completely alternate universe. From
It was fantastic. Yep.
Yeah, from anything, and I love the subtle nods to it, the very quick glimpses of things. The Coca-Cola ad. That's a completely different brand, but at the same time, absolutely Coca-Cola.
Yes.
And then when we flip and we see Peter B. Parker's introduction, we get the Coca-Cola logo that we expect, right?
And I love how they just told the story. They laid it out with the montage that always started with something like "Let's start all over again" or something like that. Let's get back to the beginning, and it was obvious. It's like they explain, and in my universe this happened, and in my universe this happened, and for someone like I went to see it with my 7-year-old and my 9-year-old, and they weren't confused. Yeah, it laid it out so well that and they have no prior knowledge of all of like alternate Earths and that kind of thing, because that's pretty big scientific sci-fi thinking. But it laid it out so well.
They do for parallel universe, for quantum like parallel universe theory, what Jurassic Park did for genetic science, because Jurassic Park has that great animated sequence near the beginning of the movie that is meant to be exposition for our characters, but that is actually explaining to the audience what genetic sequencing is. And I can remember being 8 years old, sitting in the movie theater and not being confused at all about what DNA was and like, oh, the genetic sequence, it has holes in it because it's old, so they put frog DNA in there, so they're part frog. It's like they explained it in a way that made perfect sense to a kid, which meant that it made perfect sense to anybody watching. And I think that Spider-Verse does the same thing for quantum theory when it comes to parallel worlds.
Right.
And the greatest thing is that as the movie goes on, you learn that this isn't just some random happenstance. It's absolutely part of a motivated plan from the Kingpin.
That was great. I just love how the trailers gave absolutely
Zero.
nothing away.
Yeah.
It was remarkable because usually you don't get that. Usually you're like, I've seen the whole movie in this trailer.
Yeah.
But yeah,
right down to the Spider-Man intros. Portions of those Spider-Man intros were used in the trailers, and I want to say like on Thursday or Friday, I think on Friday, because we were so excited about the movie, Cara and I were watching the trailers again. We watched the first trailer, Cara, Crystal, and I were sitting around, and it starts with him explaining, with Spider-Man going like, I'm Spider-Man, you know me, I did this, I did that, I did a Christmas album, a So-So Popsicle, and I said to Crystal, I was like, they must not have cast Jake Johnson yet, because that's somebody else doing the Spider-Man intro. And then Miles Morales comes in, and then it cuts back, and then Peter B. Parker shows up, and it's Jake Johnson. And I was like,
right. Oh yeah.
I was like, wait a second. And then we start watching the movie, it's not Jake Johnson. And I mean, like, this is the Spoilercast, so it's,
I know, I said that too. I was like, that's not the right voice.
Yeah.
How come that's not the right voice?
It's Chris Pine, right?
Yeah.
And and like, hats off to Chris Pine, because he was not recognizable. Not that he has a super distinctive voice, but I think I would have clocked it if he wasn't doing a thing. And I feel like he was almost doing, I think he was like almost doing his version of Jake Johnson's Spider-Man, so that it was like close, so that you could be kind of like, oh, is he just like putting on a voice when he's in the Spider-Man costume? Like, there's almost like a little bit of sort of trying to trick people.
Yeah.
And it continues right up until the moment when is it Kingpin that takes off the mask, or is it Spider-Man? I can't remember. Whoever takes off the mask.
Yes, Kingpin.
Yeah, and he's blonde, and you're like, that's not the Peter Parker from the trailers. It's not the Peter Parker from the MCU for sure. It's not Peter from the 90s cartoon. This is a completely different Peter Parker than we've possibly ever seen before, right?
It totally threw me.
Yeah.
Because I was expecting Peter Parker and from the trailers, from those two existing in the same universe.
Yeah.
I thought that like that was the whole thing, and then they turn it completely upside down, and in fact they kill that Spider-Man.
They kill him.
And I was like, is he really dead? I don't know,
Yeah.
because we see him in the trailer. He's gonna like dye his hair. It's gonna be, he's gonna be undercover because everyone thinks he's dead. But no, that's not it at all. Like I thought I had it figured out, and it took me in a totally different place.
Once I clocked that the voice was different, I turned to Crystal and I said, that Spider-Man's gonna die. Like, he's gonna die, and then Jake Johnson's Spider-Man is gonna show up from another dimension. And she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, they're gonna kill that Spider-Man. And she was like, oh no. And sure enough, they did. And I mean, like, they did, like, and I think that's one of the other things, is that this movie just doesn't pull punches. Like they take you there. They kill Peter Parker. His identity is revealed to the world. Man, like, that whole sequence from the moment that it kind of happens until Miles is at the gravestone is just so well executed. And I mean, they can't have predicted, obviously, that the Stan Lee cameo would be so much more than a cameo. It's obviously his first movie cameo since his passing. Probably not his last. I mean, the rumor is that he had shot several cameos for upcoming movies.
Yeah.
Like kind of all at once, like they kind of did a batch of them, but
Because they knew the end was coming.
yeah. And I think my guess is that Far From Home will probably be his last appearance. But it's one of those things that it's like it's kismet, it's serendipity, whatever you want to call it. Like it's just such a perfect way to commemorate the icon that is Stan Lee, and his words to Miles, and the way that they're played with such sincerity and then punctuated with a joke.
It was so perfect.
And I mean, like it's a joke, but at the same time, it's also what this whole movie is about. And it's such a great message, and it's such a great takeaway for kids, I think. This idea that like the suit always fits, right? Like it doesn't matter who it is. It could be any, and like when they talk about, like Peter always said, it could be anyone under that mask, which is actually Mary Jane paraphrasing Stan Lee, who had said like the reason why Spider-Man wears a mask, why you can't see his skin, you can't see his face, you can't see his hair, none of that, is because he wanted it, like he and Steve Ditko, they wanted it to be a character that anybody reading the book, anybody who picks it up, looks at it and goes, I could be Spider-Man. That could be me under that mask, right? And it's just like, I think, like I watched Homecoming earlier in the day. We went and saw an afternoon showing, like 4:30ish. So Cara and I had watched Spider-Man Homecoming earlier in the day. I'm a terrible parent. She's 2.5 and I'm watching Spider-Man Homecoming with her, but she liked it. She's a champ. Like I thought for a minute, like, I don't know if the Vulture will be too much for her, but she was fine with it. And I mean, like, we were sitting at home, so that might have been, during the middle of the
night
day.
The night before I watched Amazing Spider-Man, the Andrew Garfield, with my boys and Samantha, and she loved the lizard guy.
Yeah, it's so funny.
It was great. They're just not at the age where they're going to be having nightmares about these characters quite yet. But yeah, I mean, I did that too. Sorry, continue on with your Homecoming.
Sorry, yeah. So like I watched Homecoming, which is after I did my MCU and review along with the guys at Kind of Funny in the lead up to Infinity War. They were kind of ranking their stuff, and I was kind of going through going like, okay, where do I put stuff? And I had Iron Man 3 as my top MCU movie for a long time. And then did that rewatch, and Spider-Man Homecoming is like unequivocally my number one MCU movie. And I think that they do so many things so well, but it is definitely the MCU version of Spider-Man. And like it's a specific take on it, right? And I love that take. It is one of my favorite versions of Spider-Man, but it is definitely tied into that whole cinematic universe. This movie comes in and is so perfectly comic book Spider-Man, even though comic book Spider-Man doesn't show up in this. Right? Like that version of Peter Parker is absent from this movie. Now, like Chris Pine's Peter Parker is pretty close, but we don't get to see a lot of him.
Well, not even that close. I mean, he has a Christmas album. Like, he's still more of a goofball, like a parody.
Yeah, so like it's definitely like a heightened world, right? And it's definitely playing to the comedy elements more, but it nails the core of what Spider-Man is all about. And they do it 6, almost 7 times over in the movie.
Right. Yeah.
And it just blows me away that they managed to do it. Now, I kind of wish, my absolutely only complaint about this is that we didn't really get a lot of great character moments for Penny or Spider-Ham or even Spider-Man Noir. Their introductions were great, and they each kind of got a moment in the final action sequence. And Penny does have that great moment when the robot is kind of taken out. But I don't know, like I kind of just would have liked a little bit more. We got a little bit more with Gwen. We definitely got a lot more with Peter B. Parker. But I guess at the end of the day, it is Miles' movie, right? And it is about his origin story.
I think they needed to, like, this is the same thing. If you read the Spider-Verse comics, there are, I think, 4 spider characters that they absolutely focus on.
Yeah.
They are, well, of course, Spider-Man, maybe more. Spider-Man, Superior Spider-Man, Gwen Stacy, Jessica Drew Spider-Woman, and Spider UK. I think those are the main ones that they deal with. And Spider-Pig.
Yeah.
But there are like 100 more Spider-Men, but they're just there to show you that there's a lot of them out there. And I think that's the case with these 3 characters here.
Yeah.
We don't need to have character development on them because they are side characters. And that's as many as they were willing to put in without having like 50 Spider-Men in there.
Which we're saving for the next one.
That would have been awesome, but yes, exactly. Yeah. But if everything goes like they've already announced that there's going to be a Spider-Gwen spin-off movie from this.
Yep.
I would love to see a 1930s in this style, 1930s style Spider Noir starring Nicolas Cage. Like, that would be just awesome.
I think that what they need to do in the lead up to the sequel to this is they need to put together a bunch of shorts for the different Spider-Men, for the Spider people.
It lends itself so well.
Yeah. And just do like little 5-minute stories with a bunch of different spiders, and just tell that story.
Well, and what I loved about those little the history portions where they recap their own origin story is that each of them are done in such a completely different style. So if we got that short film in the Spider-Man Noir style, or we got that short film in the Spider-Gwen style that looks exactly like her comic book. Yeah. Like the color palette and everything was dead on to how it looks in the comic book. And then the anime influenced Penny Parker. Like this is just a gold mine for some fantastic opportunities.
Yeah. It's so incredible how they managed to within one frame have 5 characters who were all, I mean, not all, because I guess Gwen, Peter, and Miles are all kind of the same style, more or less. But Spider-Ham, Penny, and Noir are different styles, and they occupy the same frame. Yeah. But you don't question it. It's
we don't.
Like, Spider-Ham and Penny are 2D characters in a 3D space. And you're just kind of like, yeah, whatever, right? Like
it's so good.
They do such a great job of all that. And like the movie is just filled with so much heart. I said on Twitter, and like I'm not ashamed to admit, I cried twice during this movie. When Stan Lee shows up, and then later when Prowler dies, when his uncle dies, right?
Right.
That's because they developed that relationship so well. The dynamic between Miles, his father, and his uncle, and sort of like it gets you like he's gonna die. The second that he gets shot, you know that he's gone. And it's kind of a build up to it, and it's heart-wrenching. But then when Jefferson shows up and realizes what's happened and he punches the ground, right? And it's just like the gravitas and the reality of it and the vocal performances from all 3 of the actors in that sequence are just so powerful. And it's such a I don't. There's so much more going on there than just a superhero and a supervillain and his father who's a cop. It's like there's like a larger story about sort of like that the sort of it's hard to talk about because I'm white, but I just from watching lots of different media, especially media centered on African American and urban culture and that sort of thing, like that dynamic of the two brothers and they're on the opposite sides of that, and it's like the way that they talk about each other, where they kind of each respect one another, but they also like they kind of broke each other's hearts. Like Jefferson broke Aaron's heart because he became a cop and feels like that's a betrayal, but Jefferson feels betrayed by Aaron because he never, like, he had so much potential and he didn't live up to it, and like there's just like this great dynamic, and Miles is stuck in between, and he's sort of being pulled in both directions and being asked to choose a side. And ultimately, the Ultimate Spider-Man, funny. He ultimately chooses his own path, which is actually somewhere in between them, right? Because Aaron Davis is the Prowler, and Jefferson Davis is a cop, and Spider-Man is kind of both of, like,
a vigilante.
He's a vigilante, but he's a good guy, right? And it kind of like it brings those two things together, and I just think like that scene is just such a pivotal moment. Obviously, it's then they make a really big point of it in the next scene that is his Uncle Ben moment, and I thought that was so smart. And I mean, like, I hate to lose the character of Prowler, because there's so much in the comics. There's so much that Aaron Davis goes on to do, including joining Spider-Man's team, especially in the Parker Industries stuff, almost working as Peter's decoy, so that it's like, so Peter and Spider-Man can appear in the same place.
Oh, okay. Is this after Spider-Verse?
Yeah, this is after Spider-Verse.
Okay, because Prowler is not Aaron Davis in 616.
Isn't?
It's Kobe
Okay.
Brown.
Who's the
Kobe Brown?
Oh yeah, sorry, it's Yeah, you're right. Sorry, I got the characters mixed up.
Because Davis is Prowler in the Ultimate Universe.
Yes.
But not in the regular.
Okay, but just in the Ultimate
If it happens
Universe.
in Spider-Verse, though, they merge those two stories together, right?
I don't know if it was Spider-Verse or if it's like when Miles joined 616, right?
Right.
I don't know how much, because I feel like there was a connection to Miles in one of those stories, but that's okay. This comic books are confusing. In any case,
but
like,
you're right though, because when we watch that and Prowler dies, and Peter leans over and whispers to my wife Katie, and he says that his uncle died just like Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
So like instantly he understands the correlation and the allegory here. They did a fantastic job. He understood what was going on. Yeah, and it's just so well done. It's so well executed, and the fact that they don't do it right at the beginning of the movie, that it's a build up to it, and that is the end of the second act, right? Like that kind of brings that to a close, and moves into the next set, because the next act is going to be mostly action, right? So it's really great to get all of that emotional stuff out of the way, so that Miles can have his it's almost like a cocoon. He gets wrapped up in the spider web and he gets out of it, and then he becomes Spider-Man. He becomes the Ultimate Spider-Man. And the connection to Aunt May, expertly voiced by Lily Tomlin, which was a great choice for this incarnation of Aunt May, who's totally a bit more of a kick butt, no nonsense Aunt May. Although, I mean, many of the versions of Aunt May in recent history have been a little bit more forceful, a little bit less of the
doddering old woman stereotype. But this version's so great. I mean, the sequence when they're fighting in the house and she's like, "Take it outside," and as they destroy the house, the look on her face. But then the spider cave underneath the house and everything.
Funny. I just love that she is like the Alfred
Yeah.
of Spider-Man now, and she's like the keeper of his technology and his legacy.
Yeah.
And she was not surprised at all when other dimensional Spider-Mans come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, and so I think this is my take on all of that, is that in this specific universe, in this segment of the Spider-Verse, this is the version. This is the version of the story where Peter tells Aunt May.
Yeah.
And so
she's a major player.
And so she helps him. And because Aunt May is an integral part of it and helps him, he's able to do more than he ever did before. Right? And that's why he has the whole layer underneath the house, because, because she facilitated that. Right. And that's why she knows, and whatever other adventures they've been on. I mean, she knows what a goober is right away. She calls it the goober before anybody else says it. And, it's there's so many things about it that are just so perfect. That they establish, like, okay, there are differences in every one of these worlds. And in this world, Spider-Man's got a spider lair. He's got a whole cave full of everything, and there's the spider buggy, and there's the spider cycle, and it's everything.
I loved all those Easter eggs.
So good. She's absolutely not taken aback when Peter shows up, and when they go down, like the other dimensional spiders are already there, and she's all good with it. It's fine. Everything's fine. And it's all just kind of, it seems like it's all in a day's work for this version of Aunt May, which I really enjoyed. And it also gave, like, I don't know, it's an update, and I feel like a lot of the versions of Aunt May recently have been updates in the sense of taking a female character that is previously fairly powerless in a lot of situations, not really able to have any agency just by virtue of the character's status amongst superheroes and whatnot. And they managed to actually put Aunt May in a higher status role than, I mean, I would say any of these Spider-Men, right? Like she's calling the shots at a certain point and telling them what to do, and helping them get things sorted, right? And that is absolutely moving her into that Alfred role, and giving her that status of the sort of the keeper of all of the technology. But it establishes such a fun world for Miles, for this version of Miles, that by the time the movie is over, you're kind of like, okay, cool. When is the next one though? Like, when do we get to come back to these characters? And there's so much towards the end that indicates that absolutely we will be visiting these characters again. I can't wait for more of this. This is I knew that I was going to love this movie, but both this and Venom for me this year were probably the two biggest surprises.
Well, you haven't seen Teen Titans go to the movies.
I have not seen Teen Titans go to the movies.
Up until Spider-Verse, that was my favorite superhero movie of the year.
It?
Like, it's so amazing.
Well, let me be really clear. I wouldn't put Venom as one of my favorite superhero movies of the year.
Okay.
It was just a huge surprise. I thought I was going to
Gotcha.
hate that movie. I thought it was going to be just a piece of total garbage. And I was half right. It is an unadulterated mess, but I don't care. I loved it. It was so much fun. So much fun. And I to the point where I want them to now connect the Venom movie into something. I want him to be connected to a Spider-Man. even though like they weren't able to with that movie.
Right.
But yeah, because the characterization of Venom himself was so perfect for me. I don't know if that's really a great version of Venom to classic Venom fans, but for me, like, I don't really connect with Venom that much, and that version of it was so good. And then this movie just like knocks all of that Spider-Man stuff out of the water.
Yeah.
It's been a good couple of years for Spider-Man. It's like
It really has. They've really turned around that franchise.
it's amazing, right?
yeah,
Again,
yeah.
there's another pun. It's really hard to use any sort of adjective around Marvel characters, but
Oh yeah, well, especially Spider-Man.
especially Spider-Man. It's really a web of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
No, but it is amazing how they took two tanked versions of the franchise, iterations of the franchise. Now, like Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2 were great for their time. They don't hold up. I don't think. I don't personally think that they've held the like withstood the test of time. And, I mean,
I don't think so either, which is why
sorry, go ahead.
it's why I chose to show the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man to my boys before seeing Spider-Verse rather than the Tobey Maguire one, because quite frankly, I actually quite enjoy Amazing Spider-Man a lot. I think it's great. It has its issues, but
It falls apart in the third act for sure.
but it's far, far better,
Yeah.
I think, than the Tobey Maguire one.
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man 2 is awful. That one I fell asleep in the middle of.
Yes.
But and Spider-Man 2, the Tobey Maguire one, is fantastic, but they are dated for sure.
Yeah. And Spider-Man 3 obviously kind of spoils the whole thing, right?
Oh yeah, we don't even talk about that one anymore.
Except for the great reference in this in this movie where it's like
What was the reference?
he's kind of going through his story about like he's done all these different things, and then he's like, and then I saved the city, and then I saved the city again, and then this happened, and he's doing the dance, and he goes, but we don't talk about
right.
that.
Yes, yeah. Oh, okay. So, my joke was actually a reference to Spider-Verse.
Yeah, but it's
didn't
like,
even
we don't
recognize
talk about
that.
that anymore, and they just kind of keep moving. Yeah, no, but yeah,
That's
like
funny.
it is really, really impressive that they've managed to come back from that with. I mean, if you really think about it, at the moment there are 4, I guess 5 if you count the comics. There are 5 successful Spider-Man universes currently running. You have the comics. You've got Marvel's Spider-Man, the animated series, which is a really great cartoon. Not the best Spider-Man cartoon. Spectacular Spider-Man still holds that.
Spectacular.
But
yeah.
but Marvel's Spider-Man is pretty good. And then you've got obviously the MCU, and then you've got Spider-Verse, and you've got Venom, which is Spider-Man characters without Spider-Man. But it's still, I mean, like whether the movie is good or not, it doesn't change the fact that that movie made a lot of money, and it's definitely getting the sequel.
Wow.
Like it's very impressive that Sony and Marvel and Disney have managed to do this, because after Amazing Spider-Man 2, it was kind of like, can you guys just give it back to Marvel? And then obviously they gave Marvel and Disney the ability to use Spider-Man in Civil War, and we thought, oh great, we got what we were asking for. Spider-Man is in the MCU. That's it. That's all we need. You guys don't need to do anything else. But Sony was like, no, we're still allowed to make an animated movie. And now it's like, okay, yeah, okay, yes, continue making animated movies, please.
In fact, they did it with Disney's blessing as well, because
Yep.
Kingpin was in this movie, who is a Marvel or was a Disney property.
Mm-hmm.
So Sony had to go to Disney to get that from them, and so they have. I love this new partnership.
Yeah.
This new relationship that they have between studios. It's actually hopefully going to work to our benefit.
I think so. I hope so. And I hope that with the success of Venom, that Marvel and Kevin Feige can get a little bit more involved with that for the sequel. Because for those who don't know, it's been a little while. I mean, Venom's out on Blu-ray. If you haven't seen it yet and you don't want to get spoiled, I guess plug your ears for a second. But
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it yet? Okay.
Go ahead and spoil me. That's fine.
Woody Harrelson is Cletus Cassidy.
That's so perfect.
At the very end. And it, like, when they revealed that at the end, it was like, okay, now you have to make a sequel. You have to make that sequel. I need to see that movie. And so I'm so glad that we're going to get that. But I'm also really hopeful that Kevin Feige is going to lean in a little bit more on this one with the success of the last one and say, okay, here's what you guys need to do. You guys need to tighten this up. You need to do more of this, less of this. Pick a genre and run with that. And I really hope that they learn the lesson from the first one, that Venom is a romantic comedy between a man and his alien parasite. Because when the movie is doing that, it is at its absolute best. So I hope that they figure that out. But
does Kevin Feige have that kind of sway at Sony that he can kind of say those things? I mean, he can try to say those things. But will people listen to him?
I think that he has a good working relationship with Amy Pascal, who's the Kevin Feige over there, right? The two of them have been working very closely over the last few years. And there was a little bit of rockiness around Venom, but I think ultimately, with that success, that relationship, like that part of it, can maybe, like now she's got a little bit of leverage to go back to him and say, "See, maybe we did kind of know what we were doing."
Yeah, right.
And for them to kind of be on a little bit more even playing field, and for them to maybe want to play ball a little bit more with allowing Sony to make something, because when you get down to it, Spider-Man Homecoming is not actually a Disney movie. It's a Sony movie with the MCU stamp on it.
Right.
As opposed to Venom, which is a straight up Sony movie in association with Marvel, which is a very different thing. As Spider-Verse is also a Sony movie in association with Marvel. And that's different from having the MCU Marvel Studios logo at the beginning of your film, right? So
yeah, and I think you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, I'm really hoping that this is going to be like, these two movies at the end of the year are going to be a really great bridge towards more cooperation between Sony and Marvel, and the two of them looking and going, okay, the more we work together, the better we are, the better off we both are, right? Like, and I mean, like, Fox, it's too late now. They had their chance to play ball, so they didn't. Now Disney just bought them, so I will see where that goes with the Marvel characters and all that sort of thing, that were licensed by Fox, but. It really is a lesson to everybody who was at Fox, or who I guess still is at Fox for now, in what they should have done. It's so funny to see the two ways that deal goes, and to see Sony go, okay, clearly we need a little bit of help, a little bit of coaching with these superhero movies, because we want to make as much money as Disney and Marvel are making. And for Marvel, it's like, well, like, you can only go so far in the MCU without that character. And sooner or later you have to be willing to sit at the table and make a deal. And they did, and the result is some great stuff. But man, it's crazy how lucky we are right now that these movies, A, that they exist, and B, that they're as good as they are. Like what did I can answer that question. I know what the trade-off was in this timeline to get all these Marvel and Star Wars and Disney properties, like all of this stuff that is so good. Like, the trade-off is the horrible political climate, not to mention the fact that the earth is slowly cooking. So, like, it's gonna be a quick descent into chaos, but at least we're gonna
enjoy some good movies on the way.
Yeah,
down.
we're gonna have some cool movies to watch on the way into chaos. So yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else in the movie proper that you want to talk about before we go into the post credit scene?
I absolutely loved the design of the Kingpin in this movie. This is so. I think we should dive a little bit into the animation process and all this kind of stuff. Now, one of my favorite artists, and he's been a favorite artist of mine for a long, long time. He's an underground artist named Jim Mahfood.
Yeah,
and he has done a few Marvel comics over the years, but he mostly does kind of his own independent stuff. But he was actually a character designer and artist on this movie, and did a lot of design and worked a lot with Kingpin among others. And you can definitely see he has a very urban graffiti kind of influenced graphic design style as well, and it's all over the place. And then one of my other favorite artists is Bill Sienkiewicz, who's I don't know if you know Marvel Comics, you should hopefully know Bill Sienkiewicz because he's been around for a long time. Prolific in the 80s, did a lot of painting and very avant-garde kind of experimental style. And his Kingpin that he did in a Daredevil series in the 80s, actually an Elektra series, it looks exactly like this. This Kingpin with the huge body with this round little head that kind of sticks in the front of the body rather than on top of it. So it looks like he's really hunched over. It's completely Bill Sienkiewicz by way of Jim Mahfood, and it's fantastic. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I love Jim Mahfood as well, and his fingerprints are all over this in the sort of like the frenetic kind of sketchy aspect of it. That is, and the off-model nature of so much of it.
It's so great. But and it's so weird because the characters of Miles Morales, and his dad and the main characters are grounded in realism, and we have this completely unrealistic Kingpin, like you were talking about with Penny Parker and Spider-Ham. Yet the Kingpin works. He still works within this universe. He still fits and interacts well with the other characters. He shouldn't, but he does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we talked earlier about this movie being revolutionary in 3D animation, and one of the main ways that it is revolutionary is the element of 2D mixed with 3D.
Yes.
And they went through some really unique processes, some actual like old school processes, using new technology, obviously, but old school techniques, to bring some life and a little bit of magic to the computer animated elements, and that's they basically illustrated, they drew 2D elements over the 3D models, and the way that they did it was very classically by just going frame by frame and drawing in these elements over top of the 3D elements.
It's a little more complicated than just that because they still had to keep in mind that they need to have stereo images for 3D.
Yeah.
And so they had to actually physically, like with a pen and tablet, draw the features onto people's faces. They still had to be kind of vector images or like geometry that could be moved around depending on which stereo view you're looking at.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like, it's very clean. It's not like a sketchy style, but any of those times that you get that real close a frame on the character's face, and you look at like the furrowing of the brow, like you get those great lines as they kind of make different expressions. That stuff was all like traditionally animate, not traditionally necessarily, because it's not like they were using ink on cells or anything, but
digital ink.
But yeah, digital ink on digital cells essentially. And like Kurtis says, like they use vectors so that they could manipulate it, so that it could, that it could be blown up and done in the most high fidelity way possible. But it's like that. There's a touch to that because it was hand done, frame by frame, that makes such a difference. And I feel like it just adds so much to those moments, especially when we get those really great character moments and expressions on their faces.
Yeah. Well, and this is something that we who grew up in the renaissance of Disney animation through the 80s and 90s, this is what we've been saying since the dawn of computer animation, is that you can get way more expression when you actually draw something rather than with a computer model.
Yeah.
And so with when you're thinking of like things like, we've come a long way for sure. And when you watch these modern movies like Moana, you do get some great expressions and emotion through the animation, but it's not quite there. It's not quite there. And so when you went, and I was reading a lot of articles on the making of this movie here, and talking to the visual effects supervisor, and him saying that the decision was that they want to model their characters and animate it on the computer, but then the decision to actually go in and draw the faces over top of the models, in order to give it way more, like to put the attention on the emotion, because you can do that and be way more expressive when you actually have more control when you're drawing. So I thought that was such a brilliant idea, but it came with a problem. And this is really interesting. And I'm going to get into some of the nitty gritty details of animation here. Typically, when you animate classically, when we're talking about like with cells, you can fit 24 frames per second. That's what your eye can recognize when you're flipping through the images, and it makes it look like it's a fluid motion. Most animation is actually done on twos, which means that every other cell is when there's a slight movement. So you have a movement, and then you double that cell, and then you do another movement on another cell, and then you repeat that cell, and then another movement, you repeat that cell. So there's actually only 12 frames per second. And but computer animation, it's a straight 24 frames per second. In fact, a lot of it is 32 frames or even more, because it's computer animation, and you can have completely fluid motions. You don't have to draw every single one of them. But when they're drawing the faces on there, they tried doing it on ones, which is a different drawing for every frame, but it was too fluid. It wasn't giving them that classic animation feel that they wanted. So they decided to draw them on twos. However, when you tell a computer to render their images on twos, it doesn't make sense to them, because you're essentially telling the computer to stop a motion every other frame. And so they had to create a new technology, a new program that would tell the computer to put a ghost frame in there that we don't see in the end result, so that it's still rendering the whole thing, but then it's going to kind of remove every other frame or something like that to give it that 2D look. And so if you watch the movie, and a lot of it's really, really exaggerated, in a lot of cases they actually animate or tell the computer to render on threes, and in some cases even fours, to give it a really kind of jittery look that gives it a very certain style. And I thought that was really, really neat. And again, something that most computer animation companies don't dare to do, because why would you? It would seem backwards to do that.
Well,
usually when you animate on fours, it's a shortcut.
Yeah. So a really great example of this is actually Star Wars Resistance, which is going for an anime style, but they completely miss the mark, because it's way too fluid. It is like it's more than 24 frames for sure. It's running at least 30 frames. And in high def, it just reeks of artificiality, if I can make up a bit of a word. Like it just feels so computer generated. And then on the flip side of that, a series called The Dragon Prince that's on Netflix they kind of emulate that On 2's look in a similar way to Spider-Verse. Now they do it really well. It looks really good, and it emulates that anime style. They're going for kind of like an Avatar: The Last Airbender style. So they get most of the way there. It's still some stuff is a little bit too fluid, but they don't do it as well as Spider-Verse, but that's a television production versus a film production, right? So obviously with a film production you can hire more animators and they can work harder on those technical animation aspects until it gets just right. With TV, you're always behind the eight ball. So they do what they can and they do their best. But I really feel like Star Wars Resistance completely misses the point of being 2D styled and having the cell shading and the thick black lines and all that sort of thing, when it is just 100% fluid animation. It kind of breaks it, and it doesn't really work. And they're trying to go for the anime style, like that Studio Ghibli style, and it's like, well, part of that is the economy of motion and the economy of the way that the characters are designed, to trick you into thinking that they're moving when they're really nothing is happening. And that is kind of the Japanese animation hallmark, is this incredible ability to do 3 things in a frame that are on a cycle. And then one thing is unique, like the lips moving and maybe the eyes blinking, and you totally sell it. And it's like, okay, because that grass in the background is waving, and because the light on the pond is reflecting, and because maybe they've got
the camera's panning or something like that.
Yeah, or they've got a scarf that's just kind of slowly fluttering in the wind. Nothing else in the frame is moving but those elements, and those elements are moving on a 10 frame sequence over and over, just cycled and cycled and cycled and cycled, in that Scooby-Doo running through the same hallway over and over and over again. The exact same idea, but done in such subtle ways that you totally miss it. That's kind of what you're going for. And they do a little bit of that in this, and they kind of manage to, with some of the background elements and that sort of thing. I found that there wasn't, although the character, the main characters might be moving a lot, the backgrounds in a lot of scenes are often just static. Like they tend to be standing in a room where there's not really anything else happening. Other than,
which is realistic.
Yeah.
I'm sitting in a room right now, and I think I'm the only thing that's moving.
Yeah, and I feel like CG, because you do a lot of the time. So it's like,
for sure,
there's a lot of doodads and spinning whatchamacallits and things on screens and that sort of thing that tend to take away from, tend to be distracting, or overly done. And I mean, Disney movies are a great example. Not overly done in a negative way, but just so grandiose, right? Where Moana is a good example. In Moana, every single element of every single frame is alive with motion and blah 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 and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well,
but it's a very different
sometimes
style.
that has a purpose in Moana, because the whole movie is about the environment and life and that kind of thing. And I think it's generally a rule that your character is not static. Even if 2 characters are talking and one is listening, that person, shifts their weight from one foot to the other, or scratches their arm or something like that. 'Cause there's always movement in Disney,
Yeah.
but they don't have to in this one.
Yeah.
Except for Spider-Man Noir's jacket was always flapping.
Always
in the wind, always there was no wind.
Where,
Love that part.
Where he goes, the wind follows. And it,
yeah.
What is it? The wind, it tastes like rain or something like that. He's some stupid. Oh my God, it's so perfect. It's so good.
Yeah,
it's
I loved
so
it.
good.
Yeah. Okay, so the other thing in the animation I wanted to mention is that there's no motion blur, which is a big deal. This is something that when 3D animation first started coming about, motion blur wasn't a thing. It didn't exist. People didn't know how to make that happen because the computer doesn't render computer doesn't register motion like an actual film camera does. So that was something, I can't remember which movie it was. It was one of the Pixar ones that really it might have been Incredibles actually, that developed motion blur and really that really changed the way characters looked, because it gave a whole lot more realism to just film, the animated film in general. And now everybody does that. But for this movie, they didn't use any motion blur at all. That was a specific decision to go back to more traditional way of animating, but also to give it a more comic book look, because we have, in comic books you don't get motion blur as well. It's either drawn as lines or something like that. But you don't actually see. I mean, I guess sometimes now you do put a blur filter over top of some of your images to make it look like it's going, but that's not a classical.
It always
way
looks
of
so
doing
cheesy.
that.
I hate it.
Yeah. So this was their decision, was to actually they did some things like smears, which is making a face look like it's stretched across a thing that you would show in maybe one or two frames to make it look like it was a blur. That's a 1930s animation trick. And so they use that kind of thing, or they would they just I don't know, they just didn't use it. So and it added to the look. It made things pop a lot more. It made you think about where people were going, even if this was all subconsciously. Like, you don't even register that there's no motion blur.
So I think one of the reasons why you don't register that there's no motion blur is that, unlike a lot of computer animated stuff, especially early computer animation, they play with depth of field a lot in this movie. Yes. And they do it in a really interesting way by essentially giving you it's kind of halfway between a double exposure and misaligned registration, color registration, which is a very comic book thing.
Exactly. The misaligned registration is what the VFX person I was reading an article about that's how he explained it. They wanted that look. And so, it's exposing the different layers of depth of field and also the colors in the depth. And misaligning them. Sometimes it looked like I was looking at a 3D image without 3D glasses on.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments, and it takes, I think it's probably it's the most noticeable at the beginning of the movie because you're not used to it yet. But about 10 or 15 minutes into the movie, your brain just kind of clicks and realizes, oh, this is meant to be blurry. Don't look at it. Like, if what you're looking at in the frame suddenly does that, it means you're supposed to be looking at something else, which we're very well trained in when things go into a Gaussian blur, which is what you would expect from a traditional film camera when the depth of field shifts. So it's called a rack zoom when that happens. So think of I don't know, there's a character in the foreground talking, and then somebody walks up behind them and the camera doesn't move, but the focus shifts from the person in the front to the person behind. And now all of a sudden, it switches where everything behind the character was blurry, and now the character is blurry and everything behind them is in sharp relief, right? That it's that idea, and our brains, from watching so much film, and because that's much closer to the way that our eyes work. It's not exactly the way that our eyes work. It's a bit of a trick, but
Yeah.
because we're so used to it, we grow up with that, and they've been doing that since the 1930s, since they basically could pull focus on a camera. It's just a part of film language that we understand, and then Spider-Verse comes in and kind of flips that on its head and goes, okay, we're going to use this registration trick to accomplish the same thing, and it takes a little bit for your brain to catch up to it. Now, I saw it in 2D. Yeah. Did you see it in 2D or 3D?
I saw it in 2D as well. Yeah. I think I really want to go back and see it in 3D to see what that effect looks like.
I really want to go back and see it in 3D IMAX before it leaves the theaters, but that might not be possible. But I'm definitely going to see it in 3D before it leaves the theater, because there are several sequences, especially the interdimensional stuff, where it is very clear that you're supposed to be watching a 3D movie.
Yeah.
So I just want to see the movie again, because I just want to see the movie again, catch the stuff that I missed and all that sort of thing, just experience it again. But I definitely feel the need to see it in 3D. Which I think would have been too much for Kara, which is why we went to 2D. And Crystal doesn't particularly like 3D, so that kind of influenced it as well. But
I'd rather see a film first in 2D.
Yeah.
I'm like, if it doesn't do well in 2D, like if it's relying so much on 3D that it suffers when you see it in 2D, then it's not a good movie. But so you mentioned the interdimensional, like the dimensions, especially that final scene where they're trying to get back, each character trying to get back to their own dimension. And it's like, if you've ever read any classic Steve Ditko Doctor Strange comics, this is Steve Ditko's world coming to life, because he was a master of doing these really, really weird landscapes, outworldly kind of dimensions that Doctor Strange would visit, and that was what we were seeing visually on the screen here. And you mentioned how when Stan Lee's cameo came up, like, you were affected by the way the words that Stan was saying, and he was a writer, and Steve Ditko was a visual writer, and so when I'm seeing that, I'm like, wow, this is. I really wonder what Steve Ditko would have thought if he'd seen this. This is his work, his legacy coming to life right here. Both of those guys who created Spider-Man, they both passed away this year. And so you mentioned how this was a great tribute to Stan Lee, but it's also such a great tribute to Steve Ditko. Both of these guys were pioneers in what they were doing in the comic medium. Both passed away this year, within months of each other.
Yeah, wow. It is kind of amazing for that both of them would pass, and then we would get this, which is, in my opinion, I think the best incarnation of Spider-Man on the big screen that they've pulled off. I mean, certainly the truest interpretation of that character on the big screen. And of that character, again, 5 times over, 6, 7 times over.
Now, I know that you want to get to this post-credit scene, but there are some things that I want to talk about first.
Okay.
One of them is there was a comic series in, I think it was the early 2000s or maybe the late 90s. It was called Spider-Man's Tangled Web.
Yep.
And it was what it was an anthology Spider-Man book where each issue was a different creative team and a different story and a different take on Spider-Man, usually from an outside perspective. And there was one issue where this little boy, he's an African-American kid living in, the ghetto or wherever he is, and he has a rough life. And Spider-Man pays him a visit, and pays him a couple of visits, and everybody doesn't believe that he's friends with Spider-Man and that kind of thing, but he keeps coming back, and this Spider-Man eventually teaches this kid just about his own self-worth and stuff like that, and this kid really looks up to Spider-Man, and in the end of the issue, the very last page. It's like you turn over the page and there's this reveal, like Spider-Man's going to take off his mask. And he takes off his mask and there's an African American guy under the mask. And we realize that this Spider-Man wasn't real. It's a figment of this kid's imagination. But to this kid, Spider-Man is African American.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a new, different concept that really took people by surprise with that one issue. It's a fantastic issue, one of my favorite Spider-Man issues. And then years later, Brian Michael Bendis pretty much does the same thing, but in a permanent, ongoing basis with Miles Morales. And I just love the implication of anybody can wear a mask. This is like, and when I say this movie is going to be revolutionary for superhero films, I think now we can see, like, this is the beginning of a cultural shift.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the testing waters for to see if people are ready to accept a superhero that is not the superhero. Not only is it not the superhero that we're used to being, Peter Parker, but it's also someone of a different race.
Yeah.
Can we pull that off? Is that something that people are okay with? We're not calling Miles Morales Spider-Boy or Spider-Kid or, Spider-Miles or, he's Spider-Man. He is Spider-Man. So could we do the same thing with Superman? Which we've kind of seen in the comic books because we had a Chinese Superman just recently, which I think is great. Me being Asian myself, so or half Asian, so it's are we ready to see that leap to the big screen in those cases as well? And I really hope that we can, because it lends itself to some way more storytelling potential, because these people will come from very different perspectives and different backgrounds, races, and cultures. And it's not to say that we will get rid of the Clark Kent Superman. He'll still be there, but we also will have this other Superman that people can also relate to, or different people can relate to in a different way.
Yeah. I think the Spider-Verse is an important movie. It's not just great, but it is also definitely the door opening for a lot of different things, because when you really break it down, you've got 5 Spider characters in main roles as heroes in this. 6 if you count Peter that dies at the beginning, but he's kind of, I don't really count him because he's kind of the same as the other Peter. They just kind of have slightly different personalities, but they're mostly the same character.
Yeah. They're still Peter Parker.
Yeah, they're still both Peter Parker. But then we've got Afro-Latino Miles Morales. We've got anthropomorphic pig, which doesn't really count for anything, but is still like not a standard white guy. We've got Gwen Stacy, a female spider, and then we've got Penny Parker, who is an Asian. I guess, is she Asian American? I haven't read any of her actual comics.
No, she's flat out Japanese.
She's flat out, yeah. Okay, so like Asian female superhero, which, like, there are not a lot of those, and there certainly aren't a lot of those that aren't gratuitously sexualized, like, for example, Psylocke, right? Who just walks around in a one-piece swimsuit, right?
Right, which they've just reverted her back to her British body.
Have they? Okay. Well, there you
in
go.
the comics, I think they realized that this was like
problematic.
a little bit of a little problematic in this day and age. So they stuck her back. Whether that's okay or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there you go.
But yeah, like, here's Penny Parker, who is not your stock super heroine character, but in any case, I mean, like, and then you've got Nicolas Cage as Spider Noir, right? But
Old Man Spider.
Yeah. So and I would even personally say that Peter B. Parker is representative of all of us in our 30s, moving into 40s and older Spider-Man fans. And he represents us with that spare tire. It makes I'm not even kidding. it made me feel better about my own like body image because I'm getting older and it's getting harder and harder to maintain any sort of physical fitness. Especially with the kid and the poor sleep and the poor eating habits as a result of the poor sleep, as well as the stress. So, having a Spider-Man that looks like me, even though I've grown up my entire life with a Spider-Man that looks a lot like me, I've been referred to as a Peter Parker looking guy in the past. And I always took it as a point of pride. And then as I got older, wasn't as skinny and was a little bit more on the sort of squishy side. I was
people
like,
stopped saying
people
that.
stopped saying it, but now there's a Spider-Man that looks like me again. So
that's so funny.
But I think like that's the cool thing about this movie is that it does a really good job of transitioning into a place where we can have Miles Morales lead his own movie. I wish that wasn't necessary. I wish that we were living in a society evolved enough that anybody could play any character at any point in time. But that's not where we are. Where we are right now is that like, if it's a white character and you make it something other than white, a lot of white dudes get really, really upset that something is being taken away from them. Now,
it's a hard thing because at the same time, you say it would be great if anybody could play any character, but then we watched Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
And Scarlett Johansson plays a character who's Japanese in the comics. But we say that that's not okay.
It's not okay because in this scenario and in this perspective, white people are not a minority and not an oppressed group, right? They're not marginalized.
Absolutely. So. But the comment I think can't be then it would be great if anybody could play anything.
Yeah,
because that's not actually the case.
What I'm saying is that like if all things could be equal, right? Then we wouldn't have that uneven power dynamic, and then it wouldn't be. It's a really hard thing to get your head around because it is like because we do live in this world, and in this world, it is unequal. But if all things were equal, it wouldn't matter who plays what. And you could interpret characters one way or another and change them. But because we live in a world where there is such gross inequality, appropriating an Asian character and making them a white American character is ridiculously inappropriate, right?
Well, it was even more inappropriate. She was playing a character who was Japanese trapped in a white woman's body.
Yeah, it just there were layers and layers on top of layers and layers of kind of grossness within that movie. Not to mention the fact that it was just not a good film.
No, it was terrible.
Just terribly, terribly done. But it looked pretty though. It looked real pretty. But yeah,
but not as pretty as Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
No, not as pretty as this. But it's really great that we've got all of these diverse characters that are all Spider-Man in various forms, but we also have our white guy Spider-Man, right? Like he's there. He's a different version from what we're used to, but he's definitely there. And it's a fun interpretation of that character. But I do think that it's really cool that I think that it's intentional. It's a choice that he is played as comic relief and as
and a little bit of a deadbeat.
And like they kind of picked the worst of the white Spider-Mans to bring into it. And I think that there's a bit of a point there because we want to see Miles rise above, right? And I think like there's also like the humor aspect of it and everything as well. But I think like it's multidimensional. It's none of these characters are just one thing. And I think that that's what's cool about it is that they all kind of have these multifunction purposes within the story, within the culture of the film, within the visual aesthetic of it. Like they're all so unique and they all bring their own flavor to it that it is just this great combination of everything. And then, can we move into the post-credit scene now?
Let's do it.
We cap off the movie in the post-credit scene with a fan favorite, a classic from the 90s, but more importantly, a Latino-Irish character, which is not a normal combination, Miguel O'Hara, voiced by one of my favorite actors on the planet, Oscar Isaac. And
Yeah.
I love Spider-Man 2099. I remember when 2099 happened. I remember the foil covers. I have 2 copies of Spider-Man 2099 in my collection, foil cover and all. I didn't get it as a kid other than the fact that he was from 2099 and he looked awesome. And that's all that really mattered at the time. But now as an adult, reading the Spider-Verse comics, going back and kind of digging into that character, the character of Miguel O'Hara and his background and his story becoming Spider-Man 2099 and then eventually coming back to our time in, I guess that would have been in like 2016, and joining and being a Spider-Man in the present timeline of 616, and getting the awesome new costume designed by Chris Anka. It's just like, for him to also be portrayed by one of my favorite actors, by Poe Dameron himself, it just goes to show that if you're a good enough actor and you stick around in the industry for long enough, it doesn't matter if you were in a crappy X-Men movie, you get to be, or a crappy Fox Marvel movie, I should say, you get to be a cool Marvel character eventually.
Which movie was that?
He was Apocalypse.
What? Really?
Yeah. In X-Men
wow.
Apocalypse, he was Apocalypse, and it was
I did not know
it was a travesty, and I think that it hurt Oscar Isaac more than it hurt anybody else because he is a true comic book fan. So the post-credit scene setting up that Spider-Man 2099 will be a main player in whatever is coming up. Now, I don't know that he'll necessarily be, I wouldn't expect to see him in the Spider-Gwen spinoff. I think that that'll be its own thing. But I think that whatever the next Spider-Verse story is, which, I mean, like, I would imagine that they'll probably pull from the comics and call it Edge of Spider-Verse or something like that.
Yeah. Or Spider-Geddon.
Yeah, that they are going to do, I think they're going to do the Spider-Verse story next. I think that based on what, like, the dialogue in that scene and the setup of it and the fact that he is going to be traveling through the multiverse, gathering spiders to fight some threat, I have to imagine that it's gonna be connected to the spider totem, and it's gonna be like they're gonna introduce all that stuff, and it's gonna be that story, but it's gonna be, instead of focusing on 616 Peter and Superior Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen, I think that it'll focus on Miles and Spider-Gwen and Spider-Man 2099. I think that they'll probably be the core. I would imagine with the success of this that we're going to get Peter B. Parker back again, and we're going to see him sort of like return to his prime. It would be really cool if he comes back and he's got a new costume, something different, and my hope there is that they're establishing that that's the Spider-Girl timeline, and that might be how we get to see Peter B. Parker come back, is as the father to Spider-Girl to Mayday.
To May, yeah.
And because in the Spider-Verse story, that it doesn't go so well for that version of Spider-Man. He saves the day, but in a very similar fashion to what he was trying to accomplish in this movie. So yeah, I would love to see that play out, to get him back for a little bit, but then to sort of pass it on to May Parker, Mayday, as she's referred to.
The brilliant premise here is that you could kill off Peter B. Parker,
Yep.
and we could still get another Peter Parker. We just pull him from a different
Exactly.
dimension.
And
so it's not. Yeah.
So if we're gonna do it, if we're gonna go all the way, and this is where I want to go with this, give me the top 3 spiders you want to see in the next Spider-Verse movie.
Oh man. Okay. Well, I've always had a soft spot. I know that the Clone Saga is revered as one of the worst Spider-Man stories, but I've always had a soft spot for Ben Reilly, who is the clone of Spider-Man.
Yeah. So do you want to see him as Scarlet Spider?
No, I want to. Well, no, I because I really like the Spider-Man costume that Mayday eventually adopts.
Yeah.
I love that costume, and so I would like to see that. But I mean, Scarlet Spider would be great, and he's kind of back in the comics as that character.
Yeah.
With the the 90s hoodie with no sleeves or whatever. So, that would be one. I would love to see. Oh man, there's so many choices. Put me on the spot here. Now I can't.
Okay, I'll give you one of mine.
Okay.
So I'm gonna save the best for last. So I'm gonna start with a really obvious choice, which is Tom Holland. I would love to get that Spider-Man, and it doesn't have to affect the MCU. I wouldn't want it to affect the MCU, but I want some version of Tom Holland's Spider-Man in there as like Tom Holland voicing it, but whatever his costume is at the time, because he's got a couple new costumes in the new movie in Far From Home. But whatever the MCU incarnation looks like, I want him to look like that, but animated and voiced by Tom Holland. I think that would be really cool.
And that's possible in the Spider-Verse comics. You don't actually see them, but 2 characters talk about. Did you see that one Spider-Man? He looks like that guy from Seabiscuit. And then the other guy says, yeah, and that one over there looks like that guy from Social Network.
Yeah.
So they can totally... Or Social Network? No, that's not the right movie.
No, that is. Yeah, that's right.
That's... Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Andrew Garfield was in
yeah,
that.
that's right. So, yeah, you could totally see that. I think that'd be great. I think Indian Spider-Man would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because there's some pretty cool storytelling there. He's got a good origin. And it would again bring just some more diversity to the story. And we don't get very many Indian superheroes. Yeah. So that would be pretty awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess I got to come up with another one, right?
Sure.
I had one. I mean, like, I would say like Spectacular Spider-Man from the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon series would be really cool to get in there. But I don't know. I kind of want to go with somebody a little bit more off the beaten path. I'd love to grab somebody who has held the mantle of Spider-Man but isn't Peter Parker. And that's tough. I'm having a hard time thinking. I mean, like, the Prowler was Spider-Man for a while. Yeah.
Or like there's What If comics, like what if Aunt May was bitten by the spider. There actually Ben Parker is a Spider-Man in one of the universes of Spider-Verse.
True. Yeah.
That'd be kind of cool. It'd be neat because he totally runs away. He doesn't follow his own advice about great power, great responsibility.
Yeah.
So he just hides in a bunker. I would love to see the Japanese Spider-Man with leopard on because he plays such a pivotal role in the Spider-Verse story, and it's just awesome to have a Spider-Man with a giant robot.
Yeah, that's a must-have. That is a must-have for sure. I can't believe I didn't think of that. Yeah, that is because that is like he's not Peter Parker, right? He's like it's like Takeshi or something.
Yeah, it's a Japanese guy.
Yeah. Yeah, so my final, this is the least likely. We are more likely to get Tom Holland than we are to get this one.
I know who you're
going to say. You know what
I'm
I'm going to say. And it's,
because you said this when in our podcast, in our Pullbox podcast, you want, let me guess,
the
amalgam version Spider-Boy.
Yeah, I 100% want Spider-Boy in there. Spider-Boy is one of my most favoritist comic book characters of all time. And for those who don't know, in the 90s, Marvel and DC did a crossover event that was Marvel versus DC. And the final result of that battle between the juggernauts of both labels was essentially the two worlds coming together into the Amalgam universe. And the Amalgam universe was all these different characters mashed together. And in the 90s, at the time, there were no two cooler characters, in my opinion, than Spider-Man, because of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, and Superboy, Connor Kent, as he would later become known, the clone of Superman and Lex Luthor, and mostly because of his awesome sunglasses and leather jacket. So when Amalgam brought together two characters, the two coolest characters from both labels, into the character of Spider-Boy, I was elated, to say the least. It was so great. He had all of the cool things about Spider-Man: web shooters, sticking to walls, super strength, the spider motif, along with all of the great things about Connell, which includes the leather jacket, the great hair. The sunglasses become the spider mask, which is like it's just the eyes basically, but as kind of a domino mask esque sort of situation, and the attitude, that irrepressible 90s devil may care attitude of Superboy. So good. And they're bringing that Superboy back in the comics with this new Young Justice comic that's coming out.
Oh, really?
So, they're bringing back basically a bunch of the 90s sort of vibe with this new Young Justice comic.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
I can't remember who's writing it. It might be Bendis. I don't know. But he's writing Marvel stuff right now.
No, he's fully DC.
Is he fully DC?
Bendis,
That's right.
He's
He switched over. That's right. He was Marvel and now he's over. Yeah. So he's writing it.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm all for that. So it's not going to happen. We're going to see all sorts of other Spider-Mans. We're going to see, I think that the of all of the ones that we just talked about, the most likely are Scarlet Spider Ben Reilly and definitely Japanese Spider-Man with Leopard on.
Yeah, right on.
Those are happening.
Although Spider-Punk in the comics has become a cult favorite.
That's true. Spider-Punk is very popular as well.
So we might see him come out eventually. Yeah.
And the great thing there is that not only do we get to think about like all the great spiders that could show up, we get to also think about all the awesome casting for those roles. Because when that voice comes up, and I mean, like, I realized that Oscar Isaac was in the movie before we even saw him, because the credits roll by and it goes Oscar Isaac as interesting bystander, or interesting person number one. Or something like, it's interesting person number one and interesting person number two.
Oh, does he play 1967 Spider-Man as well?
No. Interesting person number two is Greta Lee, the Lila.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah,
right.
his artificial intelligence.
Okay.
But yeah, it's the two of them talking to each other. But they're like it goes by in the credits, and they're kind of the last big names to go by before it goes. I guess Stan Lee comes out, but whatever. And you're like, I was like, wait, what? No, what? Wait, what? Oscar Isaac's in this movie? Who was Oscar Isaac? He must have just done like one of the background characters or something, and I just didn't notice because it was one line. And then you get to the end, and he opens his mouth, and it's Oscar Isaac, and he's Spider-Man 2099, and I was just like, you'd ask Crystal, I lost my mind. I was like, oh my God, I can't wait for this next movie. And that's the point of an after credit scene, right? It's to make you completely forget about the movie that you just saw and only care about the next one.
Yeah. Well, I loved the fact that they went to the 1967 series. Mm-hmm. They do that in the comic as well.
Yeah.
One of the stories takes place in the 1967 show, and another one takes place like in the Spider-Man newspaper comic strip. and so I want to see them I want to see more of the 1967 on the big screen with those characters interacting. What would be great is if they spent more time hopping through dimensions in the next movie, and so that we get a whole ton of different styles. It would be a lot more work to develop all those different environments and that kind of stuff, but that would be really, really neat to see.
I think after this movie opening at number 1 and making all of the money this last weekend, that they'll have the budget. They'll get the budget to do what they want to do with the sequel.
So cool.
Cool. Well, I think we've done it. I think we've adequately spoiled Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Look, I'm going to be talking about this movie for a while. So even though we're on holiday break with everything else right now, although we do have 2 more spoiler casts coming this month. We're going to have one for Aquaman and we're going to have one for Bumblebee. But even by the time that Arrow comes back and Star Wars Resistance comes back, I'm still going to be talking about Spider-Verse because
I'm telling everybody I know to go see this movie. It is the best thing that you will see all year. And this is in a year with Infinity War.
I mean, we had Black Panther at the beginning of the year. We had Infinity War. We had Solo. We had Ant-Man and the Wasp. We had Venom. Apparently there was some sort of a Harry Potter type movie or something like that sucked, but and I didn't.
And my previous favorite, Teen Titans Go to the Movies, which was fantastic. You still got to see that one. But out of all of those good movies, this one came so late in the stage. And holy cow, this is amazing that out of all of those great movies, this one's the best. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's really hard for me to say best movie of the year in a year when Solo came out, because that movie's kind of special to me. But this is pretty close. They're on pretty even playing field. I mean, like, you've got a story about Han Solo meeting Chewbacca, and then you've got a story about all of the different Spider-Mans. I don't know. I'm not going to pick. I'm not going to choose between the two of them, because guess what? I can have both. They can both be my favorite movie this year. Because
I will say flat out that Spider-Man's the best.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Of course, if you in the future, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this through YouTube, and you want to get this in an MP3 format, you can do that by heading to patreon.com/thunderquack and making a monthly pledge of $5. You get access to that. You'll also get access to the Thunderquack Patreon group on Facebook, as well as the exclusive Thunderquack podcast that we put out every month. But thank you for everybody who listened all the way through here to the end. We've been talking for quite a while, but it's a pretty good movie, so there was a lot to talk about. But thank you. I catch us on our different podcasts. Head to thunderquack.com to check out all the different podcasts in the Thunderquack network. And basically stick around, because within probably the next week and a half to 2 weeks, we're gonna have a spoiler cast for Aquaman, and then soon after that we'll have a spoiler cast for Bumblebee coming up on YouTube and on the Patreon. So thanks for listening, and we will catch you guys on the next one.
Spider-Man rules.